Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, amid calls to save an industry and with it thousands of jobs, there will be emergency talks. David Cameron flying home. Business Secretary Sajid Javid cutting short a trip to Australia for a crisis meeting on the future of British steel. This following Tata's decision to put its entire UK operation up for sale. In a moment, Jeremy Corbyn on Labour's demands for intervention. First, over to our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, in Port Talbot.
Yes, John, so it is that this little corner, this roundabout outside the gates of the works has become a bizarre epicentre. Jeremy Corbyn stopping off here, going east back to London, leaving his holiday in Cornwall early. The business secretary told to get out of Australia fast, get back, and we'll probably see him here on this curbstone tomorrow afternoon, I would imagine. A lot of people in Port Talbot asking why he was in Australia and not in Mumbai lobbying for this industry. David Cameron, the Prime Minister, coming back early from his holidays, and he's due to have a ministerial meeting in Downing Street tomorrow to discuss what they're calling the steel crisis. Crisis it is, but it's a lot, even for this town of Port Talbot, to absorb. Overnight came the rejection of the rescue plan in Mumbai, so this morning the arrival of the banners at Port Talbot. This afternoon, the arrival of the leader of the opposition in Port Talbot.
How do you keep a plant open that's losing £1 million a day?
Well, we're doing interviews in a moment, OK?
He said China's dumping of cheap steel is wrong, unfair, Parliament must be recalled and the government must defend British steel.
And not see it destroyed on the altar of a global corporation that's decided somewhere along the line Port Talbot is expendable, just like anywhere else they've decided is expendable. Sorry, it's not. We've got a different story, and that's why I'm here today.
Today, the IPPR think tank said 40,000 UK steel-dependent jobs are now at risk. All around Port Talbot, the same question for David Cameron and the government. If you can renationalise a bank to steer it through a crisis, why can't you do that to a steelworks? Visually, physically, economically, culturally, and let's face it, emotionally, the Port Talbot Steelworks dominates Port Talbot. Some might say it is Port Talbot. Now, if they can't find a buyer for it, and it is losing at present £1 million a day, the effects of that will be felt not just in Port Talbot itself, but in a much wider surrounding area here.
It'll have a domino effect throughout. You know, you're looking at here now, Tybark, Margam, Port Talbot, Carmarthen, Maesteg, Swansea, Neath, you know, people from all over. I've even come across people which are in Bridgend actually working there. You know, you're talking quite a few thousand without the contractors, and that will domino effect throughout.
My business wouldn't survive. There'd be no money in the town to spend anywhere, and I don't think my business would survive.
That's serious, your business wouldn't survive?
No, I don't think it would.
What happens if there's a war? What are we going to do for steel, for making armaments and everything like that? If we haven't got steelworks, what the hell are we going to do?
Tata says it's lost $2 billion in its UK steel plants and can't give an open-ended guarantee about waiting around for any possible buyer. The company said today,
trading conditions in the UK and Europe have rapidly deteriorated due to structural factors including global oversupply of steel, significant increase in third country exports, high manufacturing costs and a volatile currency.
That all leaves the British government begging Tata for more time, saying it takes months to sell a steelworks. The business ministers in confusion, one today saying everything's on the table, including temporary renationalisation to see the plant through the current crisis. The business secretary saying renationalisation isn't being considered. Wales First Minister turning up at the gates of the plant this morning to say temporary renationalisation has to be considered.
I think a state takeover of the steel industry is something that needs to be considered if a buyer can't be found in an appropriate time to get the steel industry through its current difficulties to a time when demand across the world starts to rise again. It happened with the banks. I don't see any reason why that can't be considered for the steel industry.
Ordered back to Port Talbot from a dinner in Australia, the business secretary Sajid Javid saying no to renationalisation.
I don't think that nationalisation is going to be the solution, because I think everyone would want a long-term viable solution. And if you look around Europe and elsewhere, I think nationalisation is rarely the answer, particularly if you take into account the big challenges the industry faces.
Close to the works, one man, one firm, one steel-dependent job.
Obviously they won't need so many drivers to go elsewhere to look for work.
Ian Margetson hauls steel across the UK for Owens. They've 120 wagons, 70 totally dependent on the steelworks. It goes, this depot goes too. Just out of a meeting with the steelworks owners, Tata, the boss here, Ian Owen, who says they're keeping the faith, but it's touch and go.
At the end of the day, we all have to remain optimistic and confident that there is a rescue package out there somewhere.
Do you think there is? Hand on heart?
I think it's a 50-50 call, but I think it's very much, the government, and I know multiples of people have said this, but I think this is the time that Wales needs support.
So it looks like months of desperate scrabbling to find a buyer for a plant which loses around £42,000 every hour. And no, says the government, there'll be no recall of Parliament. Well, forgive me a moment if we check the time. It's, 8 minutes past 7. In that time, do the maths. The plant behind me will have lost tens and tens of thousands of pounds. However, a lot of people are disputing those figures, and they're saying that other parts of the portfolio here are profitable. These are the kind of things that the government desperately, along with Tata, you have to say, are going to have to go through very quickly, because the time is ticking away. Tata says they're not giving any open guarantee at all about how long they can wait to find a buyer to come along and take this plant on. And there are other considerations, of course, EU, which restricts the way governments can support industries. But down here, they'll say very quick, look, the Germans supported their steel industry, the Italians supported their steel industry. Why have we not done so? Well, the business minister, as I say, could well be standing where I'm standing tomorrow, and those questions are going to hit him full force. Back to you.
Alex Thompson in Port Talbot. Well, standing on that very same roundabout a short time ago, I caught up with the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who's been in Port Talbot calling on the government to defend British steel. And I asked him first, should the industry be nationalised?
I think there should be a public stake taken in the industry very quickly to ensure that it survives. I do think it's important to have a steel industry as the basis of our manufacturing economy, but it's also important to recognise that here in Port Talbot, as indeed in all the other steel towns and cities around Britain, there's a sense of disbelief, anger and hurt at what is happening to them. These are people that have given their lives to this industry, worked for it, and now being told they're expendable because a multinational corporation meeting thousands of miles away decided so.
The difficulty
there has to be some different and better way of doing things.
The difficulty is that, as we know from Tata, this is an industry which at the moment at Port Talbot is losing £1 million a day. That's £350 million a year. Now, that, of course, in terms of the banking crisis, is not very much money. A lot more than that had to go into it. Are you advocating, basically, parity of esteem with the banking sector?
The figure of £1 million a day is actually quite debated. It is losing money, yes, but the figure is actually quite debated by people here in Port Talbot. But I think the parallel you draw is an interesting one, that the government was prepared to intervene with billions to support the banking industry in 2008-9 period, and now we're looking at something much smaller in order to ensure the survival of a steel industry and investment in it in the future. But it has to be part of a wider piece, and the wider piece is about supply of steel for railways, bridges and buildings in this country. It also has to be this question, as I mentioned earlier, of Chinese steel dumping in Europe.
Well, one of the difficulties here is that the Germans, for example, are producing steel at almost half the price, and that is not because of the steel production itself, but because of the energy costs that go into making it. Our energy costs are so much higher than those of Germany and of most of Europe, and that's because of tax.
Well, there is an issue there on energy costs, and that has to be addressed as well. There are a number of factors here. Energy cost is one of them. The value of the pound for exports is another one. Dumped steel is another one. But what is not in doubt is the very high quality of the steel that's produced in Britain. What's not in doubt is the very high levels of skill amongst the entire workforce.
But effectively, Jeremy Corbyn, effectively you're therefore calling for the dumping of green taxes. After all, those are the taxes on energy production that are costing so much in producing steel.
Well, there is a question of a parity of esteem on this. China doesn't have any such demands on these issues, so in a sense, there's an export of pollution there. So I do think there has to be a parity there. And if somebody is importing goods from a country that doesn't have very good environmental standards, then maybe we should do something about it and not allow those imports to come in.
The difficulty here is that you have so many issues in play. We've touched on some of them. This thing is going to fall to pieces before anybody's been able to do anything to rescue it. Surely you have to be advocating now nationalisation right now, hold it in the public sector until you can sell it to somebody else, and if you can't sell it to anybody else, you have to recognise that if your policy is to be pursued, then this thing may have to remain a nationalised industry.
We need a steel industry, we need the government to intervene, we need a public stake in it, we need investment in it. That has to be something that's done immediately and now. Otherwise, within a very short space of time, Tata will close down or sell off its works, jobs will be lost, the industry will be lost, we'll have no steel making capacity in the future in this country. It's that serious. We should intervene now and be prepared to take it into public ownership to ensure that happens if that is necessary.
Where does the money come from if it's to be saved?
Well, the money comes from you and me. It is a public investment for the public good, because we then maintain a steel industry in this country.
Is there any case for saying that this would have been an easier thing to deal with had we been outside Europe?
I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference. The Italian government managed to intervene to protect its steel industry whilst being in the European Union. Germany manages to support its industry whilst obviously being very much part of the European Union. The issue is the British government and its views. The Prime Minister won't even recall Parliament to debate this, and so I've launched a petition to try and persuade him to change his mind on this. I think it's that serious and that urgent. We should now be debating it in Parliament straight away.
Well, let me just ask you very finally, Jeremy Corbyn, this is the great collision. This is the collision between a polluting industry, maybe a necessary one, but nevertheless a polluting industry, and your commitment to saving the environment. It is a terribly difficult thing to achieve, to get this right. And the truth of the matter is, part of the trouble down at Port Talbot is because taxes on energy are so high, and those taxes are high because we want to save the planet.
You're presenting it as a collision when I'm not really sure it is the collision you talk about. This is an efficient industry. This is an industry that recycles a great deal of its products. This is an industry that saves a lot of the gas that it produces in order to recycle and reuse it for generating its own energy. I think we can look at all those issues, but also look at the question of the competition and look at the lack of regulation of the competition. You can turn this into a collective good by saying any imported steel must have exactly the same environmental considerations as we have in this country.
So we should do what the Germans do, exempt the steel industry from green taxes and let it far away.
Let's look at that as one of the issues, but obviously environmental considerations are huge, as you well know.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much for talking with us.